So, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world, wherever you're joining us from. Welcome to our dialogue on harnessing artificial intelligence for transformative education in Africa, opportunities, challenges, and future directions. My name is Jose Jackson Maleti, and I'm one of the co-directors of the Alliance for African Partnership, which is a consortium of 10 African universities, a network of agricultural policy think tanks, and Michigan State University that have partnered together to co-create innovative solutions that will transform lives in Africa. One of the areas where we're hoping to transform lives around is using the tools of artificial intelligence, and it is the reason why we are here today. So this is one of the first of our dialogues on the topic of artificial intelligence, and we are hoping to engage in much more in depth in our programming in 2025. So today we convene with a shared purpose to explore how artificial intelligence can revolutionize education on the continent and contribute to the advancement of our societies. We hope to learn from our colleagues in Africa, the US, and wherever our attendees are joining us from. So to our attendees in particular, thank you for joining us, to engaging in this critical conversation. The diversity of perspectives that we hope you will bring to us as educators, policymakers, tech experts, and researchers will certainly enrich the conversation and of the dialogue and ensure that our discussions reflect the multifaceted needs and aspirations of Africa's educational landscape. And so I'm really looking forward to the Q&A session. So I wanted to just, frame our dialogue a bit and perhaps provide a layman's explanation of artificial intelligence, which refers to the simulation of human intelligence in machines, enabling them to perform tasks that typically require human cognition, such as learning, problem solving, decision making, and natural language processing. AI applications can span a wide range of industries, and these are already out there. So from healthcare, agriculture to finance, and importantly, in education. So we have a lot to do. There's a lot already going on the continent, but we need, as the AAP consortium, to get fully engaged in this. So in the context of education, AI manifests itself in several transformative ways. For example, in personalized learning, where we can use AI platforms to adapt to individual student needs, etc. In teacher support, where we can have intelligent tools that would help educators to design their curricula, automate administrative tasks, etc. Expanding access, such as language translation and virtual classrooms, and bridging educational gaps for learners in remote areas, and then skills development by incorporating AI into the curriculum, etc. But we have the experts. So I'm not going to go beyond this because they are going to share more details about how about AI itself and how it can transform education. So I'm going to leave it there in terms of what AI is and how it can be used in education. So, but the objective of today's dialogue is really threefold, I would say. So firstly, we would like to explore opportunities. We would like to examine how the AI can serve as a catalyst for innovation in education, addressing persistent challenges such as teacher shortages, resource gaps, etc. We want to see how, what are some of the ways in which these challenges have been addressed? How can AI be used to address these challenges? So while it presents immense promise, it also does raise ethical, social, and infrastructural concerns. And I hope that one of our speakers is going to touch on issues around this topic. And then, of course, shaping the future. And so this is the area, especially where we are trying to get as much information as the consortium so that we can identify actionable strategies that we can use in terms of our programming in 2025. So why does Africa really need to pay attention to AI, right, in education in particular? Because we stand at a critical juncture where the convergence of population growth, technological advancement, and educational demand presents both challenges and opportunities. It is not just a tool for convenience. So AI is not just a tool for convenience. It is a potential equalizer in the face of systemic disparities. And here's why Africa must actively engage. And so our consortium must actively engage with AI in education and AI more broadly anyway. The demographic imperative. Africa's youth population is set to double by 2050, and the continent faces then an urgent need for scalable, innovative solutions to educate its future workforce. We have to think about bridging the skills gap. AI can help equip young Africans with 21st century skills, preparing them for a future where technology-driven jobs will dominate. And then, of course, the issues around localization and context. So African educators and developers must be able to shape AI to reflect the continent's languages. I think many people forget about the languages and cultures and values that on the African continent and how these must be relevant and be used as part of this whole AI development and applications movement. So, of course, as well, finally, maybe we look at global competitiveness. By integrating AI into education, Africa can position itself as a leader in innovation and technology, ensuring its voice is heard on the global stage. So we are almost beginning, although this is our first session, we're kind of calling to action around AI for our consortium. And it's really a defining moment, we would say, for Africa's educational and technological future. We know that a lot is already happening, but how can we, coordinate these actions within our consortium to make sure that, we have a very strong and positive outcome in terms of this particular technology. So by engaging in open, collaborative discussions today, we hope that we can forge a path that ensures AI serves as a force for equity, empowerment, and progress. So thank you for being part of this important journey. I encourage each of you to participate actively. We are looking forward to a very active Q&A session and to share your insights with us so that as we move forward into thinking, what are the areas where we should come in as a consortium that we make a very co-created and innovative approach to this whole, these actions around AI. So let the conversation begin. I would like to go to the next slide, please. So we do have some housekeeping. And just to let you know that for those speakers of French, we do have interpretation. If you would like to hear interpretation, please choose the French channel in the tab at the bottom of your screen. If you are using a phone or a tablet, select your preferred channel, then tap done, and then a recording of this dialogue is also being done, and we will be sharing it with attendees after the event. Thank you. Next one. I'm also going to introduce our speakers one after the next, and then we will go into having them do their presentations. So we are very excited to welcome our keynote address speaker, Professor Vukosi Maravate. He is the APSA University of Pretoria Chair of Data Science. He's an associate professor of computer science at UP and focuses on AI and natural language processing. Very excited to hear about that. And local or low resource languages and data science for society. And he has a number of companies that he's founded, social enterprises, I think they are. And so we look forward to hearing from Vukosi. Next one. So Vukosi is our keynote, and then we'll have a panel of 3 speakers. Professor Melanie Cooper is the LaPan Phillips Professor of Science Education at Michigan State University. She's a distinguished educator and researcher in the field of science education and focuses on developing evidence-based approaches to teaching, learning, and assessment in chemistry. My kids would love you because of the chemistry parts. So we would love to hear from Melanie about how she's using AI as an educator and a researcher. Then next one is Leah Mutanu. She is an associate professor of computer science at the U.S. International University Africa. She's based in Nairobi in Kenya. And she's a professor, a computer scientist, one of Kenya's leading female researchers in the field of computer science. She has consistently demonstrated excellence in research innovation, earning lots of recognition at her university, and one of the top female researchers in computer science, according to Skyvald Scopus. So we're looking forward as well to hearing from Leah. Our third speaker on the panel is John Uduoye, and I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing this correctly, but he is the Chief Legal Counsel, and he's going to, I guess, talk about the issues around ethics, perhaps regulations, and so on. And he works for a company called KWE4 Africa Limited, which is a rapidly emerging venture capital and private equity principal overseeing a diverse group of companies. His primary responsibility is to orchestrate comprehensive legal compliance strategies, and he uses these to ensure that the daily operations align with stringent corporate governance rules and protocols. So I'm not going to go into more details about the speakers. What will happen now is we will be moving into our keynote address, and then we'll have the panels coming after the keynote. So perhaps we welcome Prof. Maravate to speak at this time.
Okay, thank you. Thanks also for everybody joining in online. I'll share my screen right now. I am joining. It's great to be here, and this is easy to see. Yes, I'm Vukosi. I am the chair of data science at the University of Pretoria, and a associate professor in the computer science department. I might have used my time to add an extra 4 minutes from that 15 minutes. And I work a lot within AI. I've been doing so since about 2006, 2007, and it's been very interesting seeing the fields grow and the areas of impact actually also grow over time. Yes, as said, Jose, being at UP, I run the Data Science for Social Impact Lab. I co-founded a deep learning Indaba, now the largest AI gathering on the continent, annual gathering, and also Masakani, which is a distributed research organization based in Kenya, and that's over 2,000 AI researchers who work on language, who work under that. I sit on the board of the Lacuna Fund, funding the creation of data to enable better AI models for the global majority, and I sit on the board of Partnership on AI. On improving AI for everybody. I co-founded the Lapa AI, which is an AI research startup company, and I sit on the forum. So I wear many, many hats. So the way I see myself is a community organizer and builder for AI on the continent, and I really take this very seriously in many ways. If you meet me at the university, as I said, I run the Data Science for Social Impact Lab. About 70% of the students or team members are working on the intersection of AI and African languages, and then the rest is data science and society. So how do we get AI into other people's hands? I will go in a bit more than the intro that introduced me and talk about, because I think it's very important for us to get to a common understanding of AI and machine learning before we can talk about other pieces. So what's AI? in a classical definition, you've got an agent, it's a machine, it exists in some environment, it can take action to achieve a goal. So I've been using this example for a few months now. Take the humble traffic light. It is a machine. It sits at the corner of a street. It can go from green, orange to red. And then the goal is to control the traffic. So by definition, as per Peter Novick there, Peter Novick and Novick and Russell in that book, in that this is a very big textbook in AI. That's an AI. And then at our house, we have a robotic vacuum cleaner. My daughter there was looking at it. It's a machine. It lives in the house. It can move around. It can vacuum. It can try to avoid obstacles. And the goal is to clean the house without its battery running out, right? So that's an AI. What's machine learning? It's a subset of AI that typically deals with the machine learning patterns from data. So let's start with supervised learning. Supervised learning is you're going to give the computer data. So here I'm going to give it 2 data points. Where the data points are the input, and the color is the output. So the red is the output. So I'm 1 red, 1 blue. Now I ask you, if I was to drop another point anywhere else on that surface, what color would it be? So if I only have these 2 data points for me to learn from, so that's supervised learning, the easiest thing is to come up with the decision boundary that is a straight line that sits in between the data points, right? This is the least assumptions that I'm making. And in the future, if a dot was to fall on the left, I will just predict that it's going to be red. If it falls on the right of this line, I'll predict that it's blue. The world tends to be not that simple. Your data tends to be much more complex. And with that, what happens is that your decision boundary also becomes complex. So instead of going from a line here, which is just a y equals to mx plus c, this is equals to this is a quadratic function. So you'll have an x squared, x cubes, those types of them. Yes, I've also made it still easier because here the data is clearly separable. What if this point here was red and that point was blue? Likely the decision boundary will still be the same. This will be still the best decision boundary because it will be the one that has the least error. So we will have some error, but it will be the least error that we have. So any dot that will be above this line in the future, I will just predict that it's blue. And if it's below that line, I'll predict that it's red. We can skip a few semesters a semester or 2. And then now we're in deep learning or deep neural networks, where now you have these models that can take in an image and they can tell you that there's a dog and not a cat in the image. And then this big deep neural network here is just preventing. Oh,
On
I
pourrait
think
voir
you might have some videos. Needs to be muted.
Il y a quelqu'un ici qui veut.
Oh. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so this deep neural network is representing that decision boundary there, and then it can take in that input, which are the pixels from the image, and then you predict that. You might not have labels, so the colors are the labels, those red and blue. You might have just some data, and then in that data, you can do automatic grouping of lots of amounts of data. This is called unsupervised learning. Why has this happened, and why I spend this time, is that before, without machine learning, you would have to write a computer program that has to process the image of the dog. Does the image have ears? Does it have a paws? Does it have a snout? Does it and do all these things exist in a specific way with fur? And then that becomes a dog. But with machine learning, with the compute that we have, you need to feed data into the machine, and the machine then learns these patterns in the data. That's why we have this explosion. But it comes with a challenge, right? So this is not the first time. AI is not something that showed up in the last 5 years. You go back to the 1960s and the 1950s, but we are in the age of generative AI. It won't be the last one, and we can learn from the past. There's going to be a lot of ideas that float around. I know I'm a bit fast, so I'm just trying to cover a lot. Most of the ideas will wither away, just like in any discipline, but some will float to the top. Just to really highlight that this is not the first a big jump in AI. I think that we've been having exponential growth in the AI field for the last 20 years or so. And here I can show you it by the publishing of papers on arXiv. So an arXiv is a preprint server where we typically upload papers before they get published, but they've been reviewed. And if you go back about 15 years ago, there used to be 150 papers, maybe a month, showing up on arXiv. And now we're likely at 200 papers a day. So exponential growth. And even if you were to cut here and go back, you would see the exponential growth in that space. But there's a challenge. To do all this work, you need compute. You need to build these models. You need compute. And this is unequal. Here, this is a picture that shows how many A100 GPUs. These are the compute units that you need to create these models. A100 is maybe 2 generations ago, like an iPhone 14. And you can see like Meta in the US had 21,000 of these. There's a private company. Some of the access to these GPUs they sell. That's why it's called public cloud. And then you see some national HPCs. These are national centers, like South Africa has CHPC. But if you go 1 generation ago, the thing that is actually used to train ChatGPT, the picture changes a lot. So one is that you see national HPCs get thrown out, and most of it that you see is private companies that are running this. So even countries can't actually keep up. I do not even think these H100s are 1 generation ago. There's H200s are coming up now. I don't think the whole African continent combined, 54 countries, has even 1,000 of these GPUs, these computing units. Today, just before I came in here, I'm in Zambia for an AI, a MOSFET and AI meeting, and we were even thinking it'll probably be even hard to track down if we had 300. Like, spending a week on the phone calling everybody and saying like, do you have these H100s? We might not even really reach the levels of just what Princeton has. And that's even pales in comparison to there's Meta or Facebook. They have 350,000 of these things. When it comes to language, before we talk about education, it even becomes a problem because of data. So we talk about compute, that there's inequality there, then there's data when it comes to things like language. We talked about low resource languages. You might have many speakers of a language, and we know for teaching, for education, mother tongue instruction is very important, but you might not have speech data, text data, tools like digital dictionaries, grammar tools for these languages. And this is a challenge because it's hard to find the resources, hard to reproduce work, and people might not even want to focus on these areas. And there's been lots of work to just try and quantify the challenge that these languages have. A thing that I wanted to highlight to you, though, is now if you think about the data that is used to train things like ChatGPT or Gemini, all these big large language models, most of it comes from either online sources, resources, or scrapes of the internet. And this work by one of the AI4D labs about a year ago looked at how much of the global benchmark data comes from what language. And in the data that they found, English made up 52%. And when they looked at the African continent, you can see there where 3 digits down of decimals of 0.03, there's Hausa 0.011, there's Swahili on 0. Of that full data. And then when they average it with all the African languages, they were somewhere at 0.000999%. And the sum was at 0.019, so it was 0.02% of the data. So that is crazy because then it means that people building tools that were thinking about helping us in doing education are going to be hindered that there's just not data on the other side. So we have a double problem here. We have the challenge that you don't have the compute, also the capability that comes with the compute. You have to have researchers and developers who can build systems of those. And then you don't also have the data if you were to try something. And there's a reason for this because of our history in whether you're in South America, you're in Africa, you're in Southeast Asia, of colonialization and empire. And some people might say, let's just get rid of those languages and use these dominant languages. But communication, it's like, language is more than symbols, right? It carries culture, carries geographic information, lots of knowledge that we want to keep in there. The question then we have to ask ourselves is generative AI, right, just adding to this part of the debt that is created by having to deal and work with low resource languages. So in this space, on my side, one of the things we've done is try to build even smaller models. We don't need to necessarily be on the other side thinking about very large models. Here's some work we did on Setswana. There's a collaboration between us, Solblaki University, us, University of Pretoria, Solblaki University, and then one of our alumni from Pretoria who's based at the University of Hawaii. And here what we did is get 25 megabytes of Setswana, but 4.5 million words, not unique, and then try to build a small language model, a precursor to something like a ChatGPT. But then another issue that comes up is data that might be biased. We found that JW300, which is a data set that was created from Jehovah's Witnesses translated content, Jehovah's Witness organization are very much prolific translators, they had data that was 100 megabytes and 20 million words, right? But then they're very religious in nature. So that's a problem if you want to use it for general content. We trained this model that can just predict a missing word. This is a precursor. It's called a mass language model. And it took about 3 days for each type of model, one with the JW300 data, one without. And from there, we can now create new tools, like, for example, here, named entity recognition. So you can put in a sentence in Setswana, can identify locations, I can identify dates, and it may be also people. We can also do parts of speech breakdowns. These become tools that people could use later on. We also built up a news categorization tool that takes in news that comes from the Botswana government. We took 5,000 articles, labeled them, and then after that, we're able to build a model that you can actually use even today. You can go to our website, and then you can paste Setswana text, and then it will tell you what kind of content, what category of that content. Things that we take for granted in languages like English that you just have available. Use Google News, use all these services that categorize for you, and then it improves your productivity or might help you create content for education, those types of things. So we need to build these things, and we were showing that we could do it, and there's a lot of other things that we're doing in our space. The other one we've been doing is how do we expand, given that the opportunities of these language models, doing things like better critical thinking because of we can improve assessment. One here is a work that is led by my PhD student, Baphumelele Masikisiki. And what we're doing here is how can we help the School of Medicine at the University of Pretoria by doing some kind of assisted automated scoring using something like an LLM, and then identifying if we can improve it. And then from there, it can actually generate better, like, a little improved feedback to students, given that you might have very big classes. So getting individualized feedback is tough. So here we use what we call fine tuning, where you take a model that's trained and then you continue training it, but for a specific use case. So let's say grading, you want to grade from 1 to 5. And then also prompting, where we're trying to figure out what are the best prompts to really elicit the expected output from a language model. So here, for example, is that we can give it prompts, or you give it a rubric, you give it examples, and then you say, here's an essay that comes from a student. Can you please then grade this, and then after give feedback? And with results, what we find is that we can really get some of these models to match the human markers. And then we're working to improve that process actually as well. And they then can give much better targeted, in some ways, feedback to the students as well. The thing that we're doing now, for example, is then trying to do fine tuning on the scoring side. So how can we make sure that the scoring reflects how human markers or human graders are actually doing? So here, it's for example, it's just that if you use prompting, there's GPT 3.5. So this is GPT from last year. And then this is what marker. So the distribution is about flat, equal. But then it seems GPT tends to give more threes than anything else and reducing the ones. So a little bit more lenient. And then with fine tuning, we're then trying to get it to match a little bit better. But then we see that it gives more ones than GPT 3.5 gives more ones here in the fine-tuned model, but actually overall, it actually is like flattening, and it's getting better in some of these. So there's still some things to fix. Ultimately, we can do the technical things, but that's not enough. I enjoy working with my lab and the people there, but we need to multiply our labs like ours by 1,000 to really meet the the demands that we have on the continent to really develop and use AI in different ways. So we need to kind of build a broader AI community. So one I wanted to talk to you about is a deep learning Indaba, which we started in 2017 to really raise an army for the continent. We wanted to strengthen African machine learning so that we can become critical shapers of this revolution. And after that initial meeting at Wits University, we had a what do we call Indaba X's? So there's the main Indaba. Indaba X's are smaller workshops that happen per country. And now, for example, in 2024, we had 47 of these workshops, because per country, that means that almost every week of the year, there's an Indaba X happening somewhere on the continent. And these are big, these are very big meetings where people go to debate, discuss, and really do a lot of cutting edge and discuss their R&D work when it comes to AI in different application areas. This was us last year in Accra, Ghana, for the main Indaba meeting. It was 800 people. We had 3,000 plus people who had applied to come. And then this year, in the beginning of September, we were in Dakar in Senegal with 650 people. I think we're 2,000 and something had applied. And this is something like, it's a really thorough, homegrown conference that runs. And one of the things that's always very important to us is that 50% of the attendants were women, and more than 200 travel grants, especially because we want students to be able to come. The other one was Masakani, that we started to look at African languages, as I said, 2,000 plus languages, and it's grown from a network that connects African researchers or researchers are interested in African languages together and finding themselves in the global space so that they can work on African languages, and it doesn't matter where. And I think this picture really, for me, symbolizes it. This is ICLR. It's the International Conference on Learning Representations. It's one of like the top AI research conferences in the world. And for the first time ever, it was held on the African continent last year in Kigali. I was lucky enough to be one of the program chairs. And the biggest workshop that was run during that conference ended up being the African natural language processing one, and that ended up being hosted in the main auditorium, given the numbers. So it's showing you that people can work on their research, on their craft, and really be globally impactful and really change the narrative. The Masakani Research Foundation I take as like the most prolific AI research lab on the continent. This was our first paper from 2021 on participatory research. This ended up winning the first Wikimedia Research Award from Jimmy Wales, the founder of Wikipedia, for democratizing the internet. And since then, more and more work annually comes out of the Masakani Consortia. And you also see how other, even big organizations start updating their work, because they use the outputs that come out of the work of Masakani to then improve their technologies as well. And last year we won the Digital Humanity Award at Ars Electronica. And sure, in my last minute, as I said, I would steal 4 minutes. We also know what got us here in building is not enough. We built community, formalization, impact of work, seniority, but we still have challenges of mobility and moving around the continent, whether it's immigration or funding. I believe there's more money in African AI than we can actually absorb. So, right. But unfortunately, that funding is coming outside the continent. We also need to build up opportunities for students and professionals on the continent, developing faculty on the continent, lecturers and professors, choosing the directions we want. If we're going to talk about education, talk about language and how it impacts education, really prioritize these things and increase the local R&D investment. As I said, we also started Elaba AI because, we're building these networks, we're building all these young people. Where do they go after they finish their studies and they work with us? Ulelapa is a socially conscious startup that works on research. We're an R&D company, first and foremost, and we build up human-centered AI, transforming society for the better. At the moment, focus on language. We have a tool called Vula Vula that does things like transcription in African languages, analysis, converse, and also translation. And we also, about 2 months ago, released the first African language large language model built from scratch, covering isiZulu, Yoruba, Hausa, Swahili, and isiXhosa. And with that, thanks to all of our collaborators, and then also thanks to all of our funders at the university that keep our lab going and doing the work that we do. And I'll stop here, but just I'll stop for a second here for people who might want to contact me so that we can move to the other things. Thank you for allowing me to abuse that 5 minutes.
What a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much, Bukosi. We look forward to the Q&A section. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions, so bear with us, be patient until we get to that stage. But a lot of very rich information about the importance of mother tongue, language, and all of the different links you have made in different areas. And I see the contributions, especially to education. And as you mentioned, making sure that we have access, you talked about data, researchers, the infrastructure, et cetera, that we must all have. So I'm really excited now to move to the next, to the panel section of our dialogue. And we're going to begin with Melanie. I think you're going to share your own screen, Melanie. So welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a huge pleasure to be here, and I'm a little disconcerted after following that barnstormer of a talk there. That was really very, very interesting. So just bear with me while I share my slides, and off we go. So I have a very different perspective on generative AI because I'm coming from a Department of Chemistry, actually. And my research area is chemistry education research and science education, mainly in higher education. And so I am not a computer expert, but I am proficient in using technology, and I've used it in all its different kinds. So I just want to give a brief overview of the way I see things so that we talk a lot about artificial intelligence, which is essentially a simulation of human intelligence by machine, especially computer systems. And, we can talk about machine learning, which is a subfield, and deep learning, which can imitate the way humans gain certain types of knowledge. But what I'm going to talk about here is generative AI, which is a very different kind of aspect, because the first three are used by data scientists. And so most of us don't have opportunity to use these different kinds of artificial intelligence. But generative AI can be used by everyone. There's no barrier to using generative AI. In the United States, generative AI as ChatGPT was released 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago. But we don't know how to use it in education. And part of that is that the generative AI systems have some common problems. So the most obvious one is that generative AI tends to hallucinate. It tends to invent things because it's a predictive technology. So the same way we see faces in the clouds, generative AI sometimes comes up with inventions. That's a problem. Another problem, certainly in the United States, is that the data, when you ask ChatGPT or any of these AI systems a question or ask it to do something, is not secure. And so what happens is that data is taken, is scraped, and used to train the model. So we can't use, for example, the commercial GPT systems out there for student teaching and learning because of the regulations on student data, and rightly so, I might add. The answers may be irrelevant, right? So here the AI prompt was salmon in the river, but that's not what we meant. So you have to be really careful about what you ask generative AI to do. Another huge issue is the cost. It costs money to use generative AI. And for us, that's an important issue of equity. Not all students have access to the most powerful systems, even though the simpler systems are free here. It does cost, and it will cost more as we go forward, I think. And the other cost is energy. It has been said that generative AI's growth limiting factor is the availability of energy. There's a huge amount of energy required for these computing systems that are involved in generative AI. We're restarting nuclear power stations, here because we don't have enough electricity to run generative AI. So this is an issue. So what I want to do first is just consider the technological solution we've been using that can help the hallucination, irrelevance, and data security. So in a typical general Gen AI chatbot, we ask it a question. There's a model out there somewhere. We can train it. We can iteratively train it. It might take a long time with our data, but eventually we'll get some kind of answer. But it's based on the materials we use to train the model. But here in the United States, that's the internet, right? That's a problem. So what we've been using is called retrieval augmented generative AI, which has a different kind of setup. We ask a question, and instead of it going directly to the model, we have user-provided content. So for education, this is important. We want what students ask the bot to be. We want them to get accurate answers at the very least. So we can provide the content. We can provide our own textbooks, our own teaching materials, whatever we want. And then that sits on top of a generative AI model that makes the responses sound human and can understandable by people. And then we get this informed response from the source. So the content is specified by the developer, the instructor, the teacher. So this reduces hallucinations and provides the appropriate level and type of information. The data is secure because this is a doubly encrypted system at both ends. So our laws that govern this for students is called FERPA. We are not allowed to, rightly so, to allow student data out into the world. And our institutional review board will allow us to do research using this kind of AI. And we can engineer the persona, the way the bot behaves, just by writing instructions in a language we understand. So there are lots of things that AI can do for us now on the instructor side. And for example, it can align learning materials. You can take the teaching standards, the learning objectives, instructional materials, and they can all be automatically tagged in a line. This is a task that would be incredibly boring and time-consuming for a human. AI can do this, and we have done this here at MSU. It can generate instructional materials. You can ask it to generate presentations using learning objectives. We can generate assessment materials. We can generate quizzes and tasks from say a PowerPoint deck from a lesson, or we can generate tasks aligned with learning objectives. So all of these things can be done and are being done right now. Here's an example on the student side, which I have actually used in my classes. I fed this. This is a free site here in the US run by Google. It's called Notebook LM, and it can make a podcast of your instructional materials. So I'll just play a little bit of it.
Ready to dive deep. Today, we're all about the building blocks of, well, everything. Atoms. You've been itching for a chemistry crash course, and we're cracking open chemistry, life, the universe, and everything by Melanie Cooper and Michael Bunkowski.
A fantastic choice, that one. It's got a fresh take on things.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. Atoms, tiny things we can't even see. Why should I care? And it's
okay. So that's enough of that. But it sounds human, and it's incredible, really. This resource is available. Students can upload instructional materials. It generates quizzes for them. It does all kinds of things. And this is right now here in the US is a free site, but there's a growing presence and pressure to use AI in education from commercial publishers. It's advertised as being the answer to education. We can subscribe to these things, and we can use AI-powered study tools. And here it says AI enforces real learning. Okay. But these claims are unsupported. We have absolutely no research to support this idea. And so I'd like you to look at this. It says AI is changing the higher education landscape, but it doesn't have to change how you like to teach. And I think that that's a problem because who's learning here? You know, if we have instructors who use AI-generated course materials and assessments, and students who use AI to study and complete assignments, and instructors who use AI to grade, and all of these things can be done, then essentially we're bypassing learning instead of enhancing it. And we really have to think about this very, very seriously. The current uses of generative AI can alleviate teacher tasks that are time consuming and should be used, right? We don't want teachers wasting their time on tedious things, but using it to teach in the same way, now that students have essentially unlimited access to information, is counterproductive. Learning is hard, and we have to figure out how to use generative AI so that students understand how to learn and how to learn those habits of minds that are so important in the real world. So one of the things that we know is that students learn by connecting ideas into a coherent framework. So we teach students little bits and pieces, and students can learn little bits and pieces from, a chatbot. But what we want to have happen is for those pieces of information to be connected and useful, so that when new knowledge arises, we can connect that new knowledge to them and have a coherent network. But to do this, students have to construct for themselves the connections between ideas and skills and be able to use their knowledge. That's what we want. In the future, students have to generate useful knowledge, not just bits and pieces of knowledge. So here's some tentative recommendations. We don't have a huge amount of research on this, but what I see is we should base use of AI on theories of learning, not just replace everything by AI and hope for the best, because that's not going to work. That's going to be counterproductive. We have to try and ensure that the student does the initial work. There's a fair amount of now preliminary research that shows accessing AI as the first step in learning is not productive. The student's not ready to learn, and they won't be able to place it into their mental framework. You have to give the AI the appropriate context. So when you train the AI or the persona that you're interacting with, it has to know what the student needs, not to go beyond it or below it or whatever. And we need to engage students with a dynamic interaction with the bot. Don't let the bot tell students the answers, because in that way the student will never construct their own knowledge. So just another warning, we're flying this aircraft with old ideas and tools, and while we're building it, and they keep changing the model. Every week something else comes out, every week. And we have to be vigilant while at the same time adapting to this new world. There's a lot of, AI can be a huge boon for education, but it could also be a disaster if we don't use it appropriately. This is a paper that we just published last month, where basically we lay out some of these ideas and with some preliminary data about how we can use these chatbots to support and evaluate student reasoning. And just a few acknowledgements. So we work with a commercial company, Custom GPT. Be-Socratic is our system that we use to gather student information. I have an NSF grant to study this, and I have a collaborator, Michael Konkowski, who I work with on this. So just a reminder, we're at the forefront of this radical transformation in education, but Silicon Valley's motto, move fast and break things, is not appropriate for people and education. So with that, I thank you, and I will stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Melanie, for this. And I'm looking forward to the Q&A because I'd like to find out from you some of the time-consuming tasks that AI can be used for a chemistry professor. What are some of the tools that can help you in specifically like what you're doing? But we'll come to that as we move on to the Q&A. So I'm going to go straight to the next speaker, and this speaker is Leah Mutanu from USIU, and we welcome you, Leah, to this presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. I think it was very interesting listening to the previous presenters. Excellent job. I found it very hard to follow or to feel in the shoes. Somebody we need to meet.
We're hearing Wame. Wame, I think you need to mute yourself, or I'm not quite sure how it works.
All right. So my name's Leah Mutanu Mwaura. I come from the United States International University, which is in Africa, in Kenya, in Nairobi. I work in the School of Science and Technology, the Department of Computing and Informatics. My area of expertise is mainly software engineering. And today I'm here to talk about infrastructure, policy, and ethics in AI-driven education. With a specific focus on examples that touch on things we do at USIU. And I'm welcoming any feedback from that. Yeah? So we can go to the next slide. Yeah, so my presentation outline will just do a very brief introduction of AI in education. I think the previous presenters have done a great job in it, so I'll only touch very briefly in that. Then I'll move on and talk about infrastructure requirements, policy considerations, and then finally, ethical implications. We can go to the next slide. Yeah. So AI in education impacts various stakeholders. Key amongst this is the learners. I like to give this example that every time I'm teaching, I am a lecturer. When I have a problem to solve, I want to go and look for a book to read. My students, on the other hand, want to have some generative AI solutions next to them. They go ahead and get code from it and present it. I think as the previous presenter has already spoken, there are a lot of challenges around that. But what I'm picking from it is that learning right now has AI in it. It takes center stage for the student. There are many benefits associated with that. For different students, you'll find that they appreciate the self-paced learning. Others find it more accessible. If they're not able to reach a lecturer at a particular time, it's very easy to go to the internet and get a solution. It does provide avenues through which students can collaborate, and learning doesn't stop, unlike in our classrooms. These are some of the benefits that have been put forward by the World Economic Forum 2024. There could be a few more, but we cannot ignore the fact that AI takes center stage from a learner's perspective. It doesn't stop with the learner also. We have the teacher. So we can go to the next slide. An example that I can give is that as a teacher, I love teaching. Okay, I love interacting with students. I love learning from students, but there are some tasks which for a lecturer, it's really annoying. I think even my previous presenter alluded to them. We don't like the preparation that goes into a lesson. We don't like marking or even setting exams, especially if you have big classes. We don't like the administrative activities that revolve around the whole activity, taking attendance and so on. The good news, though, is that AI comes forward and gives us solutions that can help us save a lot of this time. Looking at the scenario in USIU, we have been driving AI in education a lot. We're looking at learning management systems that integrate a lot of these features. Right now, our learning management system can help me create tests. It can help me mark them. It can help me take attendance. It can help me get the total of the students' marks, which really is something that I'm learning. I cannot do with it. It is more or less, I ask myself, where has all this been all my life? Huh? Granted, there are some things that we are still struggling to do that AI is not yet able to achieve. What I have in front of you on this slide are some statistics done by McKinsey, I think in 2020, on how much AI can support teaching. You notice towards the left that AI does a lot in terms of preparation, evaluation, and administration. Going towards the right, the activities which we are still struggling to make AI do. After listening to Vukosi's presentation, I know it's only a matter of time before AI can actually do them. So where I'm going with this is that AI is taking center stage in education, but that does not come without a penalty. My presentation today is going to touch on a few of those things and hopefully kickstart discussions on how we can address them. So we can go to the next slide. I will begin by looking at infrastructure that AI in education demands us to have. Some of the requirements have already been alluded to by my previous presenters. We know that a lot of data is needed, and I think that goes hand in hand with the storage requirements. That data needs to be processed. We need to think of the connectivity involved, the hardware, the software, and as one of the previous presenters mentioned, there's a lot of energy required in that as well. It doesn't stop there. The people manipulating it also need to have the skills required to do that. And the challenging thing is that AI is always evolving. So the skill set that these people have need to always be improved on. Looking at this side of the planet, the reality is that those things are not always available. But I have had my previous presenter mention that it probably is not just a challenge in Africa, it is prevalent in other parts of the globe as well. Looking at Kenya, I know that acquiring these huge data storage facilities many times means that we have to revert to cloud storage. When it comes to connectivity, we have to compromise and look for low-cost suppliers. For the hardware and the software, sometimes we have to outsource, and sometimes we rely on open source software. I know I'm one of those people who always goes for open source first. And it's a delicate balance because all those things that we do to help us address the challenges in the infrastructure requirements come with limitations. They also present their own challenges. And it's a very delicate act to make sure that we balance requirements versus the requirements on the ground. We can handle it with institutions, but our learners are not always able to acquire these facilities from wherever they are outside the institutions. And that does present a few challenges. Let's go to the next slide. So in addition to infrastructure presenting challenges, we need to think about policies revolving around AI in education. It's a discussion whose time has come. Probably it is a bit late, and the reason being that there's heightened adoption of AI. I know in my institution that we are using AI to try and generate the course outlines that Melanie talked about. Of course, it's a steep learning curve, and we do know that AI has risks and limitations, but it doesn't just stop there. Even in the course itself, when you eventually get to the classroom, we find that AI is there, not just for delivery, but it also is there in the content. If I can think of some examples, looking at some of the departments that we have within our institution, previously you would find that they are teaching students about genome sequencing, something that they now have to integrate AI in to show students how this is done. If we go to other departments where they are doing research and they are collecting data, they cannot ignore the fact that AI plays a very central role in how that data is going to be analyzed. So now the curriculum has to be adapted to embrace AI as well, the content. And for that reason, we do need to think about policy. Next. So we do have a lot of bodies out there that have come up very strongly advocating for policies in AI and education. I believe UNESCO has also put forward recommendations revolving around that. What I have shared with you here is a framework proposed by CHAN 2023 that tries to consolidate all those ideas together to summarize what policies for AI in education should look like. And what I like about the framework that they proposed is that they talk about 3 dimensions that we should look at. The first one at the top there is the governance dimension, which I would say speaks very strongly to senior management within the academic institutions. And there are many things that they have put forward revolving around that, but I'm going to touch on just a few of them. One of the things that we note is that when we use AI in institutions, it is sort of coming up to do some of the things that were traditionally done by people within the institutions, like members of faculty. Questions of how do we address misconduct now come up, and it is important for senior management to look at how can we handle such issues. If there's a problem with something that AI has done, who is accountable? Now, in addition to the governance angle, we also have a pedagogical dimension, which is speaking directly to the teachers like me in my institution. I'll give you an example of a debate that we had in one of our faculty meetings where people are raising some of the questions that I had Melanie also speak to. They wanted to know that what do we do about this chat GPT that is giving the students all the answers, and yet that is what I want to find out. Have they learned? Am I actually assessing my students, or am I assessing this generative technologies? And the conclusion from that discussion was that we need to rethink the way assessment is conducted. If previously, a computer teacher, I would ask a student, write a program to display something that can easily be done with the generative technologies. I should now look at how can I assess students outside giving them what generative technologies can do. So I find that there are several policies around how we deliver learning to students that need to be put in place so that we do not miss the learning, I think, as Melanie correctly put it. The last dimension that I have here is the operational dimension, which is speaking to the act of teaching and learning itself. And I want to point out specifically people running the technology, the AI technology, perhaps the ICT staff within the institution. One of the things we note is that those people have a mandate to go ahead and make sure that technology is running. And traditionally, this meant that you go ahead and make sure that the software licenses are there. When they expire, you renew them. If there's a problem, you troubleshoot. If the network is not running, you go ahead and troubleshoot. With AI in education, we're introducing something else they also have to monitor. They have to monitor AI, not to make sure that it is running, but to make sure that it is actually doing what it is supposed to be doing accurately. Of course, that has other implications. It may mean that they need to upskill. We do need a department that is dedicated towards monitoring the AI in education and ensuring that it is doing what it is supposed to do. Next slide, thank you. So I have talked about infrastructure and policy. I'm going to finish by talking about ethics, which is one of the other challenges that AI in education presents to us. Now, there are many. I think one of the things that you will always hear in conversations around using AI in education is the fact that AI has challenges. And quite a number of people take this position that we need to solve those challenges before we embrace AI. For me, I believe that AI is an idea whose time has come. It is here with us. We cannot ignore it. It is time for us to address the ethical issues alongside. I think I liked Melanie's illustration of the plane that is in the air and we are fixing it as we move along. Yeah, I have several aspects here, but I'm going to just sample a few to just give an idea of what are some of these ethical issues that we are grappling with, especially in my institutions regarding AI in education. The first one I will talk about is governance. We don't have a policy yet in the institution regarding how we handle AI in education. I know the administration is actively talking about it and looking at how we can put things in place. One of the examples that I like pointing out is that as we do this, we need to remember that there are multiple stakeholders, and many times the stakeholders are not the people who we can easily identify. For example, for an educational institution, you can easily say there are learners, there are teachers, there's administration, but there are also other stakeholders who are impacted by the AI that we're using in education out there in the community. The guardians of this student, the employers of this student, and all those people need to be factored in the policies that we're going to put out. The example that I want to put out is occasionally we send out questionnaires to students online and we go ahead and ask for their consent. But we rarely think about the stakeholders. Some of these questions might be, is your fee paid regularly? The student has consented, but what about the guardian who is providing this fee? We need to look at how we can make sure that all the people who are involved provide the relevant consent. As far as security and safety is concerned, many times when we are collecting data, because of the limited resources that we have, we tend to store it in the cloud. And when you're dealing with students, some of this data is highly confidential. For example, student grades, student contacts. And the reality on the ground is that the tools that we're going to use to analyze this data many times are not tools we have created. These machine learning algorithms, we have not created them ourselves. We are only using them. So we don't know what is going on behind the scenes. This cloud infrastructure many times it doesn't belong to us. Where the data is going to be stored is probably in a different continent altogether. And some of these security issues need to be addressed. Equally important, I'll talk about accountability. I think I alluded to it earlier on. I find myself having to deal with a generation that is very entitled, a generation that requires you to take responsibility for everything that you do. Traditionally, the teacher was the final word. Nowadays, we question even what the teacher is telling you. Now, if a lot of the learning is taking place with the AI assistants, then the question is who takes responsibility? So those are some of the ethical issues. I'll probably mention the last one, the human-centered aspect. I feel that I need to still maintain my freedom of choice as a lecturer. And I can see there's a remark there that we need to wind up. So the good news is that I am done for now. So thank you for listening. We can finish with the last slide. All right, great.
Thank you so much, Leah. You provided a really very good perspective here on learner, teacher perspectives, infrastructure, governance and ethics, things that we have not really been thinking a lot about, perhaps because we're not in the direct space of that, but I'm really interested in learning more as we get to the Q&A session. So now we are at the final speaker, and he is, let's just get his name pronounced correctly. I think it's John Oduwaye. Do I have that correctly? And he works at KWE4. So that's John Oduwaye, and he works at KWE4, and he's going to share with us. He's a legal and compliance speaker, and he will share some remarks for us on those aspects. I just like to remind that it's 10 minutes because we are going to be very late then for the Q&A. And I know that the attendees have lots of questions. So let's move into John. Great, thank you so much. And he's actually presenting on behalf of his colleague, David Sokufan. So John, please. You're welcome. Is John with us? Tony, do you know? Is he muted by chance?
Yeah, I don't think he's here.
Oh, I'm so sorry then. Well, it means that if John is not here, that we have come to the end of our session, our dialogue in terms of the speakers. We would ask the keynote speaker and the panelists to start your video if you can and unmute yourself so that you can also ask the questions. And Amy Jameson is going to take us through the Q&A session. So if our speakers, Melanie, Leah, Vukosi, if you could just start your videos, and then we will have you answering the questions. Thank you so much.
Sorry, I had to unmute. Thank you, Jose, and thank you to all the speakers who were presenting today. Very interesting presentations, a lot of food for thought here. We have a few questions that are in the Q&A, and I just encourage others of you in the audience to share further questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to those. So I think there are some questions aimed at particular speakers, but also then some questions that could be answered by any or all of you. The first question, which Vukosi answered in the Q&A feature, is about at what age should children and students start AI learning in a very competitive world? And I know that Vukosi, you shared a link there, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of expand on that. What's included in
Sure.
your response there?
Oh yeah, sorry. I think I was in okay. I think it was a private link, but it's okay. Yeah, I still keep to the view that I think computational thinking is much more important. It's the same thing that we've looked at mathematic literacy as being something that assists in any child as they're growing up, become a functioning adult. I think computational thinking, not necessarily AI or robotics or like people think computational thinking is how do you kind of understand how computing works, how you can think about problems and solve and try to then break them down in such a way that they are solvable by a computer is something that can start from very early ages and then like build up. Some universities have this as even now, like, 101 classes that everybody has to take, because in thinking about the future we're living in, not the future is coming, is that becomes very important as a skill to navigate these things. Because yes, then you don't look at a ChatGPT or a Gemini as just this magic thing. You can actually already start thinking, oh, how was this system actually built? And it then brings up these, like, easier for people to bring up questions like Melanie and Leah also highlighted on the shortcomings of these systems, because you can break them down. So that was my view in those spaces. I'll try to, okay, I thought it was just thing. I'll try put it somewhere. I know, unfortunately, we can't put the chat for everybody. Yeah, I'll put the
Yeah,
link
I
there.
don't know what's happening with the chat that we aren't able to communicate with everyone, but it is in the Q&A. It's under answered questions. If folks in the audience would like to click on that, you should be able to access that link that was shared there. I want to turn to Melanie and ask about, what, as Vikosi's talking about, is how do you work with students in your and prepare instructors to work with students to navigate this environment. So could you expand a bit more on that? Given that, you presented that very powerful quote at the end about Silicon Valley wanting to move quickly and break things, and that's not appropriate for this. And so we have to teach students how to navigate in that environment. So could you speak a little bit about that and how you prepare educators to help them navigate that?
Well,
big question, I guess.
we don't know is the answer. And this is completely new, and the vast majority of educators are ignoring it, actually, or worrying that students are cheating. And I'm not now talking about computational thinking or AI in general. I'm talking about generative AI that's all students have complete access to. All of human knowledge with, hallucinations and everything else thrown in there. So I think that we have to have research, we have to have dialogues about what we think is important for students to do. Is it important that they have memorized a lot of facts that we tend to test them on? No, it isn't, because all of those are at their fingertips now. We want them to learn habits of mind. We want them to learn how to analyze and interpret data. We want them to make arguments from evidence. We want them to understand how to construct a coherent explanation for a phenomenon. And those are things that require students to connect ideas together. And so, the idea that generative AI is going to take over the teacher's job, I don't think is reasonable. For one thing, learning is a social activity, but I do think that it can provide students with a support system. And so the research that we do is we're trying to look at how to get generative AI to help students construct complex ideas for themselves, rather than the fragmentary kind of typical thing that we often see that we test students on. But to do that, we this requires a whole dialogue.
Yeah.
We're right at the beginning of this. We have a lot of work to do. So I'm sorry, but I don't know. I don't know.
I think we're all in the this is forging new frontiers, and we don't know what's coming next, but it's very interesting to think about how we shape the education to help students and educators navigate the system, which is a very complicated conversation and a dialogue.
Well, I think there's two things, right? How the students
Mm-hmm.
interact with the generative AI, which we don't know. We need a lot of research on that. But also this idea that we can alleviate teachers' work by offloading, the trivial and the routine stuff, but not the idea generation. If we leave the idea generation to the generative AI, then I think we'll quickly lose the ability to generate ideas, actually, which is a horrifying idea.
It's a bit scary. Leah, I'm going to turn to you as well for a similar question. Given some of the ethical concerns that you raised, how would you, advise working with students and educators in from the position you're in to navigate some of this? Do you have any advice to share as part of that dialogue?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I do agree. Those are challenges, as Melanie said, that we are not very sure. But one of the things that I can recommend is the need to reskill. I think for everyone, for all the teachers involved, training opportunities are required. Institutions need to invest in that. And it should start with just understanding what AI is, basically. I think more or less the way Vokosi began, because those basics are learning. We are dealing with a monster from the top. But if we have the foundations, then it's easier for us to appreciate that AI might not really be the enemy that we have thought about it being. And then, of course, creating awareness amongst people on these ethical issues, because you can only protect yourself against something that you're aware of. I think for me, that's what I would say.
I have to say, Bukosi, I really appreciated the way that you started the conversation by explaining in very basic terms AI, and then Melanie expanding on the generative AI piece was extremely helpful for me in understanding that. So Leah, that's a really important point, that we have to know more about it. We have to know more about what it is. So on that point, there's a question in the chat, in the Q&A from Chukudi Kingsley Onyachu, who's asking about recommended AI tools. As Dr. Cooper was saying, we have these tools that can help some of the monotony of our course design and all of those complicated things, and save us time. And I think Jose was also alluding to this. What are some of the tools that we might use that could help educators focus on the really key things instead of the routine? So I'll turn it, Leah, I'll turn it to you first, and then Dr. Cooper, and then Bukosi, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I think some of the tools, the other presenters had already mentioned it. At USIU, we do have an exercise where we have to put content online. And many times we've had to learn about using tools like Gemini to create content, to summarize books, and things like that. So I think that's one way to go around it. The other thing is that we have a learning management system that actually helps us do some of these things, Blackboard Ultra, and some like going ahead and creating course descriptions and so on. It does help to some extent. So for me, those are the suggestions here.
Great. Melanie, can you expand on that?
Well, I'm a little hesitant to recommend tools because I think that the things that are available to me might not be available to you.
Yeah.
Um, there are many models that are available on the web in the United States for free that you can use to do a lot of these things, but I don't know how available they are. And I understand there's a huge amount of work, so I'm gonna
Okay.
hand that to the to someone who knows more about it than me.
Great. We'll go see. Come in here.
I'm not an expert in the AI tools for education applications. I build the AI tools, but they're mostly trying to build them for general use later so that people can then adapt them for other things, and that's why our work is really centered on building the foundations for our languages. But the thing I can say from our work in looking at assessment is that the big thing is that whatever tool you use, please also assess the tool first before you go into now I'm just using it. So I was giving an engagement last week with social scientists about them thinking about the research process and where Gen AI comes in. And I said, like, one mental model that is interesting for me is to use sometimes is if you can use a generative AI tool and you can evaluate its output in a fraction of the time that it would have taken you to do it. I'm not saying it applies everywhere. It probably is a good use. So like there's things that, as I think we repeat all the time, that we need to, I sometimes might use and go like, oh yeah, I need to just tell students in my class that there's these 5 things they must prepare for in next week's presentation. And as such, can it just be nicely formatted, and then it's easier for them to read and follow. And I can just scribble and then quickly get that thing. I can quickly evaluate it and say like, oh yeah, this would have been taking me 5 minutes. Maybe now it took me 30 seconds. I can move on to something else because I have 100 of these things to do. But if you do a task and then that task takes you, to evaluate the task takes you the same amount of time to actually, if you had done it yourself, is likely a bad idea to leave it to Gen AI because the things about bias creep in there. So if you're saying this would have been something that takes me 6 hours, but to check if the Gen AI tool actually did the right job would take you also 6 hours, then you're in this place of danger. And that is just one of the things that comes in.
Yeah.
So you have to evaluate it. You have to check and go like, for these things that I'm trying, how do I make sure that it actually is doing what I expect it to be doing? It should not be assumed at all that the system will do the thing that you're expecting. Because remember, it is not a human. It does not know. These systems were created to fill in the next word, and they're trying to guess probabilistically what the word should be next given the input. It's not like, people like sometimes give it that human quality that it's actually checking and reasoning. It is not reason, and LLM does not reason. And that's the important kind of pieces. It's not magic. It is something that we can understand in terms of how it works, even people who are not computer scientists. But then you must think about, just like a calculator, you can mash on the keys, things come out. It doesn't mean that those things are useful.
But we say, garbage in, garbage out, right? Like, but if you're, yes, that's a very, very important point, that we can't just put in whatever and expect that it's going to turn out the perfect thing in the end. Dr. Mutano, do you have anything to add to that piece of things? And then I'll ask my last question. I think we're getting to the end of our time, if I'm correct, right, Jose?
No, I think it is well covered. I don't have anything to add. Thank you.
Okay, great. Jose, do we have until 9:30? We're just finishing up right now, right? So I can ask one last question.
If there's a burning question, but we do have closing remarks as well.
Okay, let me just ask one.
Last.
Yeah, in terms of, there's a question by Kali Mofuoa. Sorry, I need to get that pronunciation. About looking at, is there a future beyond AI? Like, is AI the thing for us for the foreseeable future, or is there something that is, could you see a future beyond AI in the next 50 years, a new tool that will come in? So I'll start with Mukosi and then go around to the panelists.
Yeah, as I said in my presentation, this is not the first hype cycle. AI has gone through this multiple times. Yes, there are useful things that will come out of this, just like in the previous cycles as well. There are useful things that we use on a daily basis that we do. But there is also a lot more that we're still trying to learn about ourselves as humans that we will be focusing on and building on top. So yeah, it's interesting. It's worth understanding. It's worth engaging with because, yeah, right now, if you remember the 1st of January 2023 and maybe some of the mass hysteria, and then you fast forward to November 2024, and now we're kind of thinking it's cooling, and now we're just going to, like, it's going to be there. It didn't take away all the jobs. It didn't solve all the problems, but there are things that are useful in those tools, and we're going to keep on building those and getting them better. Yeah.
Thank you. Melanie, anything to add here on your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think that I think perhaps the question is asking about what's next after generative AI. And I think that the issue is that this is a computer. It can't embody our thoughts and ideas and how the way we interact with people. It just can't. And so that to me is the next horizon, right? As we move into embodied AI, then will we see what will we see there? I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a science fiction world we're going into or not, but there's always it's going to be interesting no matter what. And Leah, anything else for you to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just add one thing. I think as far as AI is concerned, it keeps surprising us every day. There's a lot coming up. We have heard of people talking about virtual reality, augmented reality, where we now have to manipulate things without being there presently. So I think that will also surprise us, amongst many other things that will be not necessarily in the next few years. It could just be in the next 5 years.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Jose, I turn it back to you and thank all of the panelists for your full responses to these questions. I know that I've learned a lot during this. I know that I have a lot more to learn and sparked some of that interest as well. I'm assuming that is true for our audience as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone, attendees and panelists and speakers for your participation today. This was excellent. It's the beginning of our conversation, and we are looking forward to continued conversations and collaboration in this space. So this is not the end. This is just the beginning of the work that we hope to do together. And you all know who you are in the consortium. We really need to have this deep engagement with all of our consortium members. But I would say that I'm going to end it here, and I'll be passing it over to our Africa director, who's going to say some closing remarks for a few minutes, Richard Makandawiri. Thank you so much, everyone. Richard, I think I
thank you
saw
very
you.
much.
Yes, there you are.
Thank you very much, Jose. Thank you very much, panelists, and indeed also the keynote speaker. I think this has been extremely exciting for me at a very personal level. I'm a social scientist, and I've learned a lot even within the context of this very short webinar. I think this is a conversation that needs to continue. It's very, very exciting. There's no question at all that the potential for transforming educational systems in Africa, including learning, is huge, through the use of AI. And I think, as Leah pointed out, there's no question that AI is here to stay. It's not going to disappear. There are many, we've seen the expansion of the education system everywhere. 200 students, 300 students in a class. There's no way somebody can manage those huge classes without, the support of AI. But we also take, I think, note of the challenges, both in terms of energy access, particularly for rural communities, but definitely, the opportunities are huge. But I think, as my colleague pointed out, Jose, will be very eager as Alliance for African Partnership to explore how we might actually deepen this conversation going forward, and would be open, particularly in terms of strengthening these linkages, partnerships with MSU and UP, the United States International University, and others within Africa, to see whether out of this conversation we can move towards a design of some project proposals where we can jointly pitch to potential donors, because this is an extremely important area. The beauty of it is that we can learn from models and past mistakes, and we can also borrow from good models that are out there in use of AI. So for newcomers, definitely there's something to learn from. Much appreciated for the audience that attended this webinar, but more importantly, much appreciated to the speakers, including the keynote speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And just to add that a recording of today's dialogue will be shared with everyone, all the registrants. Please look out for it. Also, keep tuned to AAP. We will be co-hosting a workshop, an international workshop on AI and Africa's future in 2025. This is coordinated by the African Studies Center at Michigan State University, and we hope to co-host it with them. Keep tuned to this, and we would really love to see the participation of many of you as well. Thank you, and bye, everyone.